Welcome to the Mindful Moments podcast, a space where we explore self-awareness, compassion, and resilience through real stories and honest conversation. In each episode, we talk with incredible individuals about their experiences, insights, and strategies for navigating life's challenges and staying grounded in a complex world. My name's Lilly, a teacher and the founder of Mindful Sparks. Today I'm joined by Kheng, the General Manager of Queen's Court Malaysia and Senior Business Manager of East West Fitness and Training Ground. Since starting his career in manufacturing, engineering, consultancy and entrepreneurship in 2004, Kheng has been living and working in Thailand since 2008, and his wealth of expertise in business development and strategic growth make him an invaluable advisor to Mindful Sparks. So let's begin and see how this conversation unfolds. Hi everyone, welcome back to another podcast series. It's super exciting. We've done 7 episodes meeting really interesting people from education and outside of education to see what mindfulness looks like in their lives and how mindfulness practices have helped them, bring more joy to their lives, less stress, to live a more responsive and less reactive life. And while we were I was filming those podcasts, been working really, really hard on the business side of Mindful Sparks and really focusing in on what we do and why we do what we do. And we've had a little bit of a shift. We're still bringing in mindfulness practices. What we're really focusing on is building some key competencies, key skills within the workplace, predominantly education, to help teachers, to help those working in education thrive in a really demanding job. And what we're focusing on is self-awareness, compassion, and resilience, and how mindfulness practices, formal and informal practices, can help us strengthen our self-awareness, practice compassion, which ultimately lead to building resilience and navigating a challenging job with a little bit more ease and a little bit less stress. So we are back for season 2. So you'll see these podcasts begin to take a slightly different direction as they evolve. And as always, it's the first episode. So Kheng has joined us, my husband, and also is on the board of advisors, really helps a lot with the business development side of everything. And we're just going to chat a little bit about what self-awareness, compassion, and resilience look like in our lives. So welcome. So a big reason that this kind of shift came about was that I was realizing a lot of the focus was on the teachers teaching the students, which is very important and not to be overlooked. But there was such a big gap in getting the teachers to the level they needed to be able to teach the students. And key things that were coming up were teachers, just lacked some self-awareness. They didn't understand why they did what they did or why they reacted in ways that they reacted. And that's where self-awareness, became a really big, important point for us to focus on. So what are your thoughts on self-awareness? Like, what does self-awareness mean to you?
Just being aware. Being aware of what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, like trying to be very present. I think is as mentally and also physically. I think there are all these like small little cues, especially like when we're having a conversation. Like now, I'm feeling very uncomfortable doing this, but also knowing, like, being able to tell myself that I'm safe. Either I'm safe or either I need to calm down. Well, I'm overexcited, maybe tone it down a little bit more. But like things like that, just being very present. Not necessarily having to ground myself, but I think it's just acting suitably for the occasion.
And what our approach, one thing we really focus on when we're talking about self-awareness is something that we call the inner landscape. So our thoughts, emotions, and responses. and taking the time, like you were saying, to reflect and taking the time to kind of just say like, okay, what's happening now? Like, what am I saying? What am I doing? How am I responding to the situation? And once I have a better understanding of that, I can then begin to make maybe more informed or more intentional decisions about my next steps instead of just doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Like learning to choose your words a little bit better. Yeah. Really trying taking the time to understand like whatever's happening around you or like what the other person is saying, and then assessing those things. Because there's so many things that just happen, right? Like while you're having a conversation or trying to think about things, right? And like just trying to have a good what's the word for it? Like having an order for doing things. I think that definitely helps with the process. And then you don't have so many different things to think about at the same time, right? While you're trying to act on something. So
Do you think that, or have you noticed that when you are more self-aware or when you are less self-aware, have you noticed times when that
yeah,
shows up
of
differently?
course, yeah, the really the normal times, right, where you don't have enough sleep or you're super stressed out at work or like it could be like these weird these relationships, that you've had like for a very long time, like on this ongoing dynamic, like old relationships, say with either with old friends or or family. Um, and it's very normal to like when you meet up after not seeing them for a very long time, you fall back in that old dynamic of things, right? So it's when like I think those are the times where you can be if you don't separate yourselves or if you how do I say this? If you haven't seen them for a very long time, then I think you will notice it a little bit more. But if you don't notice this dynamic, then it probably means that either you haven't changed, haven't practiced enough to notice these things, right? But I'm very, very sure that you will definitely notice these changes, like in your perception, how you're acting, your answers to them, like everything sort of changes because you kind of like fall back into that old sort of like that old persona, and then yeah.
I think that can be the most challenging, right? When you are, you've grown and you've put effort in for yourself to be like, okay, I've noticed that in this situation, I tend to say this or I tend to do this, and it doesn't lead to an outcome that I would like. It's not a happy outcome. It's not, oh, hi, Jazz, a positive outcome. So, I would like to change the way I respond to a situation. And you work on that. Okay, I'm going to change my language, or I'm going to take a breath before I answer because I know I can be quite short and snappy. But yeah, when you meet up with certain people, it's maybe that they're not going to respond to that in the way that you would like them to. Maybe they might take a mickey or like who do you think you are type thing. And it can be hard. So it's sometimes easier because there's less conflict, right? There's this challenge just to go back into like an older version of you, but maybe one that doesn't make you feel so comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I think you notice like how you become a little bit more aware of like their responses as well, to what you saying. But I think it's like especially with like old relationships, even family, it becomes very difficult because like you end up if you change and then they're not part of that change process and they haven't seen you change and you come back, with a slightly different dialogue, right? They feel sometimes it's a little different, it's a bit apprehensive. Like, why are you speaking this way? Why are you using
Mm,
this kind of language? It's a bit
mm,
weird, it's slightly different. Like, are you trying to be a different person,
mm, mm,
or like, are you trying to either one up me or something?
mm,
It's peculiar.
mm,
It doesn't really have to be that way, right? Like, I mean, you can be the same person, and also have change, but I mean, of course, dramatic change is really different, right? Like, even I would make fun of myself too.
mm.
I don't end up using some words. Mm.
Mm. And I think that comes with as well, that I think there's a element of like, I mean, when people do, and when you do, I do, we do, start taking the time to really check in with ourselves and really kind of say, like, why do I have that thought? Why do I place value on that response? Or why do I place value on that, that idea or that reaction that I have? Where did that come from? Um, it can be quite hard sometimes, right? Because you've really got to own up. There's a lot of self-accountability that needs to happen of being like, oh, okay, like I say this because that's what my parents said, and so I haven't questioned it. But actually, maybe it's not the kindest thing that could be said, or maybe it's not the most respectful thing that could be said. So now I need to hold myself accountable to change. And that vulnerability can be really hard sometimes. And for other people, you've done some work, you've increased your self-awareness, you understand yourself better, like what makes you tick, what triggers you, what your habitual patterns of behavior are. And you're making an effort to grow and to change and to develop, ultimately to live just a more peaceful, happier, more balanced life.
Mm.
Like less drama all the time. And when people see you doing that, that can make them uncomfortable because maybe they're not doing that, or they're like, well, yeah, like why do you think
Mm.
you're better than us? Or
Mm.
why are you putting all this effort in? Like, what's wrong with how we spoke before?
Mm. Yeah, it just becomes this thing on comparison. Then after a while, like,
Mm,
oh, maybe they recognize growth with
mm.
you and that you've changed. And but I think like most of the time, like most people will equate like that kind of change to be something negative instead of
Mm,
a positive, right? Mm.
mm. So what are some things that you do to help strengthen your self-awareness, to help understand yourself better?
Gosh, it's taken years of practice, right? Like, I mean, being just like keenly aware of, and I say keenly because like you really want to, it's like you really want to make the change, right? Like it's something
Mm,
like I've wanted to do, to notice and to, uh, like if I'm like now, if I'm stumbling with words or if I can't find the right words to say, or if I'm just listening, without having to say anything, like that's taken a really long time as well to not butt
mm,
in or to like just be patient and listen, actually listen to the other person instead of thinking of what to say all the time, and responding. I think
mm,
that becomes like a habit as well for a lot of people, right? Just responding for the sake of
mm,
responding, instead of like just listening.
mm,
And because there's so much information I think you can get from actually just listening to people. But for me, I think that's been the biggest, like one of the biggest challenges, to sit down and just really listen to people in a conversation.
mm,
And that practice as well of being a little bit more patient, or doing some meditation, and also asking myself, reminding myself all the time, like why you're sitting down here and why you're listening to this person.
mm,
There always has to be a reason, right? And the that approach of like always assessing how I feel
mm,
at regular intervals, not whether I'm it doesn't matter what I'm feeling, right? But just knowing, like being more in tune with my body and my thoughts, and like knowing, okay, whether I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling very excited, or I'm feeling very happy. Do I need to take it down a notch or not? Or do I need to up it a little bit? Is the other person over there like falling asleep while I'm talking, something? Because sometimes, like especially when you're speaking, right? Like, and if you don't, for me especially, if I don't pause enough, I end up just rambling and repeating myself, and I have this tendency to do that a lot, like repeat myself constantly in like maybe one sentence. So just I think those pauses help me like express myself so much better, I think. Yeah, and that's taken a really long time to do. But I think if I mean, it's only a couple of years, right? Like I think actually, I don't know how long have we been practicing mindfulness? A very long time since 17. So it's been like 6 years, right? So this practice, it's ongoing, and I'm not going to say like I'm perfect or anything, but I have improved so much more in the way that I communicate with people. I think, and it's just continuous, right? Continuous development.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure.
Yeah, it helps me really make better. It helps me make better decisions on the spot. Very clear decisions, like, and also like I also realize like, there's some things that I don't need to say in conversations sometimes, like it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna let it go.
I think that's a hard one. That was one I found really hard, of like not always wanting to have the last word, or not always wanting to be seen as like quote unquote like right.
Yeah.
Like, no, you said this and it's annoyed me, and I'm going to tell you it's annoyed me. Does it matter? Is that the best decision you could make in that moment? Like, is that going to help you get to where you want to go, or where that relationship wants to go, or solve the problem that you're trying to solve? Or is it just going to kind of add a bit of fuel to the fire? And taking that step back to be like, just internal thought. And it's an internal thought, not an external thought. Takes time. It's true. It's very true. So with self-awareness, we've spoken a bit about that. And ultimately, like in my opinion, self-awareness really is like the most important bit. Because if you don't understand yourself, your patterns of behavior, your tendencies, your triggers, you're not going to know how to move through them, how to navigate them. So just being able to acknowledge like, oh yeah, in this situation, I tend to do this, or I tend to say this, can be a really powerful moment if you're willing to then commit and continue that journey. It's like Kheng said, I mean, gosh, it's not I've done it once, tick, good job. It is an ongoing conversation with yourself. And that's where it then leads to compassion. Like compassion for others, compassion for ourselves, which is really important. Compassion, empathy, kindness kind of get used quite interchangeably sometimes. I think it's important to know, like, kindness is, I see that's not right, or I see that's hurting you, and I'm sorry. Empathy is, I see that's hurting you, I'm sorry, that must hurt really bad. I can imagine what that would feel like. And compassion is, I can see that's hurting you, I'm sorry, that must feel really bad. What can I do to help you? What action can be taken to help you feel less bad, feel better? Or what action could be taken to make me feel better in this situation? And it's gonna be really hard. It's something that not everybody has. It's not it's not something we've all naturally got. It's something that comes a lot from the way we're brought up, what we're exposed to, conversations we had.
And like to improve your self-awareness, you need all those three things, right? To practice all those three things. It really is like, compassion to yourself, like all that is all inwards to
Mm.
you. And then you end up, after understanding all of that, then you end up projecting it to the other person that you're speaking to. And then, the conversation always gets better.
Yeah. And it can be really hard. Like there's an element of like, why am I turning the spotlight on me? Like, the other person, I should be doing things for other people, but it's really important that we look after ourselves as well. And that
Absolutely.
might be changing the words that we use to describe ourselves. Changing the words that we use to describe how we dealt with the situation, right? Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm such an idiot. Why did I do that? That's not kind, So it might be like, okay, that was a really hard situation. Maybe I didn't deal with it in the most proactive way, but I've learned a lot from it and I have a bit more awareness, so I know what I can do differently next time.
Or waking up grumpy and like being aware of waking up grumpy too. Because if you can wake up grumpy, you can wake up happy. You know what I'm saying? It's actually the same thing, isn't it? Why are you grumpy when you wake up? So just change that mindset, right? Doing things, right? Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Waking up grumpy, finding fault or finding challenge in everything in the day will just continue that momentum of that story, right? That you're telling yourself. The day's rubbish, they're annoying, that's too loud. If you can wake up and go, oh, I'm a bit grumpy, I've acknowledged that. What a lovely morning it is today. Oh, I get to go and see this person today. I'm so excited to see them. Just changing that, bringing that kind of change the lens.
But that it becomes reinforcement, right? Like, because that habit, I mean, it's habitual because it gets reinforced because you do it constantly. It's the same thing over and over again, So it actually shows there is consistency in your life. It's proof, So if you're a moaner and groaner and you're moaning and okay, so say like I wake up, like I used to wake up and I'll be really grumpy. But like that's consistency, right? And I can and I've and that's an achievement as well if you think about it. I mean, it's not a great achievement, but it is an achievement, You're waking up grumpy every day. You're consistently doing it, and then it reinforces it. So you become a grumpy person. So you're like, because you're very consistent with that. Okay. So now how do you change? So to change that, like you just come up and you just change that dialogue in your head. It's really difficult because you reinforce like a different kind of behavior, and now you're trying to enforce like another kind of behavior, and it's going to take a very long time. So you have to be kind to yourself. But the thing is, if you were consistent before at being grumpy, you can be consistent at being happy, and you maintain that consistency, and then you will end up changing, that behavior. I mean, of course, it's not easy at all. It is very difficult, but there have been so many steps. And that's also one of the things that I've had to work on, apart from like so many other things too. But it's fun, like I think like just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean that it can't be fun as well. Like you gotta make fun of yourself. So I think that's also where the compassion comes into. I make fun of Lilly all the time. So I love making fun of things. Like it just takes away the mundaneness and the difficulty sometimes of doing things, right? Just picking the funny things.
Yeah.
And I do have these internal monologues in myself as well, like very similar conversations that I have with everybody else, and I annoy myself too, It's like, the annoyance. I mean, by doing that as well, like I poke fun at myself, and that makes it a little bit lighter, and it makes it a lot easier to get through the day. Most of the time, like, what the hell are you upset about? You do this all the time, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because that's compassion as well. I think, like, seeing the funny side in things as well, that is definitely compassion to me. At the end of the day, it also makes you like a nicer person, I think, if you can if you can make fun of yourself, then I'm not saying to do it to other people all the time, but it does give you like a little bit more of an upper hand, I think, if you make fun of other people and you can take it yourself too. You
Mm.
know, life doesn't have to be like so difficult and all about like continuous improvement every single day.
Yeah.
I slip up all the time.
Yeah, we're human.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, right? And it is acknowledging those moments of, I just said the last thing I wanted to say, but it came out of my mouth.
Mm.
And just going, oh, well, like I've noticed that I did a boo-boo. Let's move on. Instead of going down that self-pity wallowing conversation of,
Mm.
can't believe I did that again. Like, I can't do this. I'm never going to change. And there are going to be days when you catch yourself doing that. And that's very normal as well. Very, very normal.
Mm.
I think compassion to others as well that's a really interesting one, because there are going to be people, familiar people or unfamiliar people to you, that you naturally, it feels a lot more natural, a lot more easier to show compassion to them, to want to help them, to want to do something. Do you want to have a chat, or can I do this for you? And then there are going to be people that you're just like, there's just like that kind of block almost, isn't there? Of like, you just annoy me so much. Like I can't see how I can be kind to you, because I'm so, like, I don't know, your thought, your values, your beliefs, whatever, are so against mine. And that can be really hard. And that's a deeper dive into compassion, of finding that common humanity and trying to see them in their full context. And not necessarily like forgiving them or to saying, yes, you're right, but being able to say, like, I can see why you've reached the point that you've reached based on education, background, all these different things. But that can be really hard.
It's really, really hard, especially if you can't find any middle ground with that other person, right? That becomes like the most challenging of conversations. And being able to like just step back and say like, and even understand that, like you don't have that kind of middle ground and it's going to be a difficult conversation. That already like in itself, like it really helps the conversation. It helps you as well, you've already framed this, you've allowed yourself to frame the situation, and you're giving compassion to yourself and the other person as well. That this, and you're reminding yourself this is going to be a challenging conversation. So you end up like, being a little bit more careful with your words, your body language, what your expectations are from this conversation, right?
Yeah.
I think then that also allows you to like be better at holding conversations with many, many different types of people. But of course, you got to put yourself in that situation, if you don't allow yourself to like experience these things, and you stay in like either your bubble or your echo chamber, all the time, and not allow yourself to be challenged, then you can't build resilience with that too, right? The experience, like all of it's all important.
Yeah.
To be able to build up this practice of self-awareness.
100%. 100%. I'm thinking about it in the context of like the classroom, as a teacher. It might be when you get an email from like certain person, or leadership make a certain decision, and you just feel like all guns are blazing, just like, I'm so annoyed, I'm so frustrated. Why are we doing this again? And trying to find that space where you can go, this really challenges me. How can I have a conversation without this impacting the rest of my day? How can I show kindness to myself? And that might be, you know what? I'm not going to reply to this email for 24 hours. And I'm going to take some break and do something to help calm me down and get me a bit more balanced. I'm going to go ask advice, and then I'm going to deal with it. That's an act of kindness to ourselves, instead of feeling that pressure of like, I have to reply now, even though I'm very dysregulated or very overwhelmed. But again, that takes practice too, of setting boundaries in a respectful way and maintaining them.
Or you could write your reply in something else, and just leave it, not send it. It's a weird way. Like I've been, I've done that quite a bit as well.
And go back.
Sometimes it's just to get it all out,
Yeah.
just get it all out and then, okay, I'm done. And then leave it for a while, go back, calm down. It'll probably take a day. And you come back and you read what you've written, and it shows like a very good glimpse in history of how you reacted at the time, and you know what you were saying, your train of thought, and all that. And it does help you frame like your ideas and everything later in future again. Yeah.
And that links really nicely back to what you were saying about how sometimes with certain people you kind of fall into past personas or past habitual conversation patterns, and you might be able to see then, okay, I've kind of slipped back into my grumpy self. Oh, there's clearly my grumpy self. Is that helpful? Is that relevant? Is it important? If it is, how can I maybe reword that to be heard in a clearer way? You know, like actually be heard instead of somebody going, oh, it's such a grumpy so-and-so. We're going to do that. And I love as well that you mentioned about resilience, right? Because all of this is building for resilience. If we just go back to the classroom and go back to teaching for a moment, teaching is hard and it's not getting easier, right? The burnout rates are crazy high in teachers globally. Like it's happening everywhere, and especially with teachers like in early years and primary, lower end of primary, and teachers with under 5 years experience. Like the burnout rates are so high, up to 30%, which is just crazy. Because teaching is a job that people love, they're passionate about. You don't just do teaching to see like, oh, this will do for a couple of years. There's a time investment, financial investment to get qualified, and people really want to do it. And if you don't have that resilience that comes with dealing with these big changes and these do this extra. I mean, ideally, we would completely scrap the whole education system and restart it, but that's not going to happen yet. But resilience is so important in life as well, of being able to kind of learn from these experiences, move on, adapt, grow, develop new strategies. Do you think you're more resilient now than maybe like, I don't know, 6 months ago, last year, 2 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you make it like part of your, what's the word for it? If you just make it part of your lifestyle, right? Then there's always this continued improvement. Like, you set your trajectory, I think. Not because you want to be better than other people or anything. It's just like improve. For me, it's more like improve communication and also improve mindset, right? At things like so. I guess the older you get, the less time you have for everything else, right? And there's just so little time to be upset about things, or to be negative, like this is that there already is so much negativity in the world. It's like I don't really have time for that. Like, and all these short interactions that you have with family, loved ones, friends, because like either we're working so much or having to split our time between doing so many different things, right? It just isn't enough time. Like there isn't enough time that you spend quality time to spend with everybody else, and you've got to switch over so quickly. So I think that self-awareness really helps too, like in moving from situation or like from scene to scene to scene in your everyday life, and then be able to manage all those feelings or manage these relationships really well too. You are really just, as you get older, you're juggling, right? And as you get older, you're adding on more stuff to juggle, and you're just juggling. You're just trying not to drop any of it, right? While trying to be as positive as to yourself as possible. Like the more positive you are, the better you become at juggling. The more grumpy you are, the bigger chance you have of like actually dropping that object that you're juggling. It's the way that I look at it, and it's nicer to be able to go through life and just really understand, where things I like I have a very analytical mind, so I like to understand, like, where I've gone wrong or where I like to improve, Prior to this, it was always about like making the other person, making whoever I'm speaking to or connecting with like happy or something, They're like, and this is also where like it's a little bit of a danger, right? Like, placing somebody else's uh happiness and joy as more important than yours, and that's one of the main things that I've been struggling with, right? Putting everybody else above uh my self-interest, like before I put myself in. Am I explaining this very well?
Yeah,
No, I'm
you're
not.
doing a great
Okay.
job.
So that's been like, that's one of the key things as well, right? Like trying to be able to adapt or, like learn when I should do that. Because of course, like most situations you want to do that, but you can't do that all the time. Sometimes you have to put your self-interest before everybody else's. There are times to do that. And it can't be them over you all the time. It's not healthy enough. Then you always end up taking the back seat, right? Then your emotions and everything, you end up like automatically pushing it, like I was saying before, about reinforcing like habits, right? Like it becomes a habit where you tend to push your feelings aside and say like, no, it's not important now. The other person's thing is important. It's such an Asian thing as well, right? Where you treat your guests better than you treat yourself or the rest of your family, right? But it's not okay all the time. So this self-awareness, like, it's being more self-aware of what I'm doing. It really helps in these situations too.
Yeah. And like when you are building resilience, like, putting other people's needs before your own, I think that's something we can all say that we've done or do. It's not saying that I'm never going to do that, but it's being like, I'm happy to, instead of meeting you 100%, I'm going to meet you like 80% because I need to respect this 20% for me. And another day I'm going to meet you like, yeah, I'll do like 40% like of this. And
Absolutely.
you can do 60 and I'll do, yeah, don't worry, today I got you. I'm going to do all of this. But on those days when I feel that my needs aren't being met, I'm confident enough to say, here's my boundary. And sticking with it in a kind way, right? Not just saying like, no, I'm not interested, but being like, I can only do this for you today. And some days it will come really easy, and some days it won't, right? Some days, like you said, right? If you're tired, you're hungry, just had a crappy day, it's not easy to keep that resilience going all the time. There might be times when you just kind of go, whatever, it's quicker to do this. You get back into your old habitual patterns of behavior. And it happens, but you don't stay in it for as long. You're aware, oh, I've just done what I said I didn't want to do. And now I can begin to make changes so that doesn't happen again. Yeah, I think resilience is, and there's also that kind of like that like kind of idea that if you're resilient, you're like solid and you're strong and you're just like get back up again and keep chipping away at it. But sometimes resilience can also be quite gentle, and I just need to take a step back and reassess and think about where I want to go from here before I get up and make those changes. It doesn't always have to be a quick jump up and
no.
solve the problem.
Yeah, you can like keep it, use it for later. One of those new strategies that you have in your toolkit.
Yeah.
It's not necessary to use everything in your tool belt
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's also where like experience comes in, right? So continuously, like that's why this continuous development like helps, right? It teaches you patience as well.
Big time. That's what I work on. Patience and stubbornness. The two things that I put a lot of attention on.
So I have a very big tool belt. Lots of things keep going in.
He's grumpy and I'm impatient that he's grumpy, and then that's how our day starts. No, I joke. Amazing. Thank you for talking to me.
It's welcome. Yeah.
So just to give a bit of insight, that conversation was just to kind of show you different points of view about what it is and what it can look like. And thank you for sharing. It was really nice. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the next kind of few conversations we have coming up on the podcast. We got some really interesting people from lots of different roles in education talking about self-awareness and compassion and resilience and what that looks like and how it shows up in their role and you know, for themselves and also externally for others that they work with. And as always, like and subscribe, and have a lovely day.